For center number 6, you're going to be focused on identifying and classifying different types of sentences by simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. This is really the big standard for 7th grade, and it's what we've been building up to all year. So in order to do that, we've got to do a little recap, make sure that we understand the difference between a phrase and a clause. So a phrase is just a group of words. Whatever you see me writing here is what you should be writing down in your notes. This is a good way to study. You know you're going to be tested on this at some point, and you've got to make sure that you know the difference. So we've talked about prepositional phrases, infinitives, verb phrases, and appositives. What makes a clause different is it's also a group of words, but it's a little bit more complicated. It's got a subject and a verb with it. So if you see a subject and a verb, you know that you're not talking about a phrase anymore. It's a clause. And we have two different types of clauses. You have an independent clause, which just like you, when you are independent, you can do everything on your own. You don't need any help. You're independent. An independent clause is just a complete sentence by itself. A dependent clause, just like it sounds like, it's dependent on another clause to make sure that it makes sense. Both of them have a subject and a verb, but a dependent clause is going to start with one of our awubises. So let's look at how we build sentences using phrases and clauses. A simple sentence, we said, pretty simple, is just a subject and a verb. That's what we're looking for. In our mind, as we're working, we should be getting rid of all those extra phrases. So get rid of phrases, get rid of prepositional phrases, get rid of infinitives, identify your subject and your verb, look for any appositives and ignore them. And if all you're left with is one main idea, a subject and a verb, you've got a simple sentence. Now sometimes you could have two subjects with one verb. So for example, if I said my mom and I went to dinner, you have two people doing one action. Or you could have one person doing two actions. I ate and drank before I went to bed because I forgot I had a doctor's appointment. So I have one subject with two verbs. A compound sentence, just like its name, think of a compound in science, a compound word, you're combining two of something. So we're combining two groups that have subjects and verbs, two independent clauses. But if you just combine them like that, put them together, you have a run-on sentence. So if you're going to put them together, you've got to have a comma fanboy. And what I want you to do when you find them in sentences is circle that comma fanboy. That's your first clue. If you see a comma fanboy, you've got to make sure you have a subject and a verb on both sides of it. So in your mind, the big thing to remember here is you're looking for a comma with the fanboy. And remember, these letters help us remember that we're talking about for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. A complex sentence, just like its name, getting a little more complex, is going to start with one of our awubises, or subordinating conjunctions, and it's going to have a subject and a verb after it. And what I've had you do when you find an awubis is draw a cloud around it. And you have a list of those in your binder. There's also a poster on the wall that you can use as a reference. The big thing to remember here is that subject and verb, because sometimes after, some of our awubises look like prepositions, like after and before. And if it just has a noun after it, then we know it's a phrase. But if it has a subject and a verb after it, then it's a clause. So in our mind, the big idea, what are we looking for, is that awubis with a subject and a verb after it, okay? And find that awubis and determine if it's being used as a clause. For a compound complex sentence, then we need to take both of these ideas and put them together. And it doesn't really matter if that awubis is at the beginning of the sentence, in the middle, or at the end. It's a complex sentence regardless of where it's located in a sentence. And then we've got to have that comma fanboy in the middle. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples. And this is what you need to be doing when you do your example sentences on the other side of this paper. Okay, whatever you see me highlight, you should be highlighting. You're doing the process to make sure that you understand the different components within the sentence. Though Leonardo da Vinci is most famous for his work as an artist, he actually spent quite a bit more time working on his endeavors in science and technology. So I'm going to look for any phrases that I can get rid of. I'll start with prepositional phrases. I see for. Now I know that for can be a fanboy. Here, though, it's got a noun after it, for his workers. As. I know as can also be an awubis, but I just see as an artist. There's no verb there, so I know it's a prepositional phrase. On his endeavors, and in science and technology. Now that I've identified those, I can get rid of them. I'm not going to say those anymore. They're not part of the sentence that I'm looking for. I can look for an infinitive, but because I don't see to anywhere in any of these sentences or in this sentence, then I know I don't have an infinitive. The next thing I want to look for is an awubis. And you can look at the poster on the wall, or you can look at the page in your interactive notebook. I know that though is one of my awubises. I want to double check that it has a subject and a verb after it. Though, who am I talking about? Leonardo da Vinci, and the verb is. And so here, this whole idea all the way to that clause is my dependent clause. He actually spent quite a bit more time working. Here I've got a subject, he, and what did he do? He spent. So I see an independent clause on this side with a dependent clause at the beginning. I know that this is a complex sentence. Okay, for the next one. Of course, his detailed sketches and distinct artistry played a large role in his inventions, and his sketchbooks later provided evidence that Da Vinci had envisioned many ideas long before the technology to build them actually existed. Okay, looking for some phrases of, get rid of course, in his inventions, before the technology. Now I know before could be a preposition, and it can be an awubis. In this case, I just see a noun after it, technology, so I know it's a prepositional phrase. I see to here. I know that to can be a preposition or an infinitive, so let me think about how to is being used. To build. Build is a verb. This must be an infinitive. All right. Now I'm going to go look for my awubis. Do I see an awubis anywhere in this sentence? And I see that. That tells me I have a dependent clause. That who? Da Vinci. What did Da Vinci do? He had envisioned. Okay, so my clause goes all the way to the end of that idea. That Da Vinci had envisioned many ideas long before the technology to build them actually existed. Now I go back and see, do I see a comma fanboy in here? I see a comma here, but it has his after it, so that's not a fanboy. I see a comma and, I know that that's a fanboy, comma and. Now just because I see that doesn't mean it's compound. I've got to find the subject and verb on both sides. His detailed sketches and artistry. Here's a place where I have two subjects. What did they do? They played. His sketchbooks. What did they do? They provided. So I've got a compound and a complex sentence. And the last one. The term Renaissance man comes from 15th century Italy, and it refers to the idea of a person with knowledge and skills in a number of different areas. Getting rid of my prep phrases first, from 15th century Italy to the idea of a person with knowledge and skills in a number of different areas. Look how much of that sentence I can get rid of. More than half of that sentence is prepositional phrases, and I don't have to worry about them doing anything else. They have already done their job, so we're going to ignore them. And look for, do I see an awubis anywhere in this sentence? And I do not. So now I want to look, do I see a fanboy with a comma? I see a comma and, so that tells me I've got a compound sentence. Now just because I see the comma and doesn't mean it's compound. I have to find a subject and a verb on both sides. So the term Renaissance man. Comes as the verb. It is a subject, and refers is the verb. So I have a comma and with a subject and verb on both sides. I have a compound sentence. Now look how marked up this sentence is. When you do your next page, you have this blank page, and then a list of different boxes of sentences. When you put them on this page, when you glue them here and cut them out, this is what they should look like. They should be highlighted, they should be labeled, there should be circles and clouds over them. Do the best that you can to help yourself figure out these sentences. It's very hard to just look at a sentence and know what kind it is. I put a little cheat sheet here down for you so you don't have to keep flipping back into your notebook. Copy down your fanboys and some of your really popular awoopuses to help you. Now, for the last thing, some of you said you didn't really like the cutting and pasting part. If you would rather just label the sentences and write on the sentence whether they're simple, compound, complex, or compound complex, and you don't want to cut them out and glue them, you can just staple that page to this first page and turn it in. Okay, so if you get this done, turn it in. If you do not finish it, it does become homework.